The crunch of gravel under my hiking boots was the last sound of normalcy I remember. It's a sound that now, weeks later, still sends shivers down my spine, a constant reminder of the day I walked into something I still can't explain. I went to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in search of solace, a place to escape the noise of the city, but what I found was a different kind of noise, a terrifying silence that hides a horror beyond my comprehension. And I went seeking peace, but I came back with a terror that has been eating me, bit by bit. Every single day, my name is Alex, and I've always been drawn to the wilderness. I'm a landscape photographer, and I often venture into the quiet corners of the world in search of beauty. I'm always seeking to capture that perfect moment, to immortalize the magic of nature in a single frame. The Great Smoky Mountains, with their mist-shrouded peaks, ancient forests, and hidden waterfalls, had always been on my list. But the reason why I decided to visit was more than professional. It was personal. A breakup had left me heartbroken and confused, and I needed a place where I could reconnect with myself, a place where I could find solace in the grandness of the wild. I arrived at the park in late summer, the air still warm and humid, a reminder that the change of seasons was close. I decided to hike to Ramsey Cascades, one of the park's most popular trails. It's a challenging hike, but the reward was supposed to be worth it. A stunning waterfall cascading down a rocky cliff, an image that I dreamed to capture in my lenses. I started early, under the pale morning light, the sounds of nature around me were soothing and calming, but as the sun started to climb the sky, the atmosphere started to change, the calmness turning into a feeling of unease. I had always loved the wilderness, but something about this forest was different, more sinister, more menacing. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through thick vegetation, the sunlight barely filtering through the dense canopy above. The trees seemed taller here, the shadows darker, the silence more oppressive. I had hiked many trails before, but there was something about this one that felt different, something unnerving that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if I was being watched, observed by some unseen entity like I was an intruder in a sacred place. As I continued to hike, I started to feel increasingly uneasy, a sense of disorientation that made my steps falter. I couldn't explain it. It was as if the trail itself was changing, like the paths were moving and shifting. I looked around, trying to find my bearings, but the forest looked different than it did just moments before. The trees were still there. The path was still there, but they were not in the same place anymore. The landscape around me had seemed to warp, as if it was a reflection in a distorted mirror. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, a consequence of being alone in the woods for too long. I tried to rationalize the situation, but deep down I knew something was wrong. Something was very wrong, and then it happened. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw a figure in front of me. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but as I got closer, I realized that it was me. Or rather, it was someone who looked exactly like me, wearing a hiking outfit that was almost identical to mine, but with a few subtle differences. The colors were slightly faded, the fabric seemed worn, the design was from a bygone era. I was wearing a brand new outfit, but that figure looked like it had just stepped out of the 80s. My heart started to race, a cold dread washing over me as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I hallucinating? Was this some kind of trick of the light? I tried to find a logical explanation, but my mind refused to believe anything that made sense. This was impossible, and yet it was happening right there, in front of my very eyes. I wanted to stop, to run away, to scream, but my feet seemed to be glued to the ground. I stood there, frozen, staring at my double, at this ghost that was staring right back at me. The doppelganger seemed to have the same reaction as me. It just stood there, staring, a look of bewilderment in its eyes. But after a few silent, agonizing moments, it slowly began to smile, and then started to approach me. I couldn't move. I was unable to act. I was just watching as this other version of myself was slowly moving towards me, as if pulled by an invisible cord. I was trapped in a terrifying loop, and there was nothing that I could do to break free. And as I stared at it, at this mirror image of myself, I felt a chilling sense of understanding, a deep realization that this was not a random event. This was a planned encounter. And I was not going to like whatever would come after this. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to flee from this forest and from myself. But it was as if I was frozen, trapped in some kind of bizarre loop. The silence in that moment was so oppressive that I couldn't even hear my own heartbeat. The doppelganger kept moving towards me, closer and closer, its smile growing wider with every step. It was then that I had the sensation that I had seen that smile before, a memory of something I had long forgotten, a memory of myself. And that is when I knew that I was in danger, a great danger, and that is when it happened. The doppelganger reached out its hand, and as my hand met its cold grasp, the world around me started to twist and distort. The trees seemed to spin, the path seemed to buckle, and the sky seemed to melt like a piece of fabric. I felt a strange sensation, like I was falling into an abyss, like my very soul was being sucked into some kind of vortex. And it was then, in that distorted moment, that I knew I had made the greatest mistake of my life. I should have never gone to Ramsey Cascades. The moment our hands touched, the world dissolved around me, a chaotic swirl of light and color that left me disoriented and afraid. When I could finally see again, I was no longer in the same place. The forest was the same, but it was also different, like a copy of the copy, like a reflection in a crooked mirror. The trees were taller, the shadows were deeper, and the silence was more menacing than ever before. And the doppelganger was still there, right beside me, as if it was my new companion in this twisted version of reality. The doppelganger looked exactly like me, and yet it was also subtly different. It had my same face, my same body, but its eyes were colder, its smile more sinister. Its clothes were not just faded. They were a clear reminder of a past era, a tangible proof that this being had come from another time, and that I was now stuck in an unknown dimension where time seemed to have lost its meaning. It was a contradiction. It was my face, but it was also a sinister and grotesque copy of it. It was a ghost from my past, come to haunt my present. I've always been a person of logic and reason, someone who has faith in science and the natural laws that govern our universe. But what I was experiencing now was something that defied all explanation, something that shattered everything that I thought was true. And while, deep down, I was still trying to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for the impossible, I knew that I had to accept that I was facing something that was not natural, that was not of this world. My photography had always been my way of making sense of the world, my way of capturing beauty and truth in a single frame. But now I realized that my lenses had failed me. They couldn't capture this bizarre reality. They couldn't explain what was happening to me. I had come here seeking peace, hoping to reconnect with the world, but I had found something much darker, something that was shaking the foundations of my existence. My lenses were not the lenses that I was meant to see this with. I was meant to see this horror with my own eyes, to bear the burden of witnessing the impossible. I tried to communicate with the doppelganger, to ask it what was going on, but it only stared at me, its eyes like two bottomless pits, its smile never faltering. It was as if it was a mirror, reflecting my own fear, my own confusion. It was a silent observer, a chilling reminder that I was no longer alone, that I was now trapped in a bizarre partnership with a stranger that had my face. And that was more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined. The silence in the forest was suffocating, broken only by the rustling of the leaves, the chirping of distant birds, sounds that seemed distorted, almost mocking me. It was a twisted version of the peace that I had been seeking. The forest was the same, and yet it was also different, as if it had a different soul, a different purpose. It was no longer a place of solace. It was now a prison, a labyrinth from which I knew I had to escape. I realized that this wasn't just about me, that I was now a part of something that was far bigger, far more ancient. The reports that I had heard of other hiking groups disappearing were no longer just rumors. They were now a terrifying reality, and I was now part of a pattern, a part of a sinister game. And I was beginning to see that this was not a coincidence, that this was something that had been happening for a long time, that this forest was a portal, a gateway to a different dimension, and I had just become a part of it. I remembered the stories that I had heard of the park, stories of disappearances, stories of strange occurrences, stories that I had dismissed as nothing more than local legends. But now I knew that there was a truth to those stories, that there was a darkness hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful place. The park was no longer a place of beauty. It was now a place of dread, a place that held ancient secrets that were not meant to be seen, and I had just been foolish enough to step into its domain. I also started to notice other small, subtle differences in the world around me. The trees seemed to be slightly more twisted, the leaves were a different shade of green, and the shadows seemed to dance as if they had a life of their own. And every time I focused on one of those small details, I felt that the forest was not just watching me, that it was trying to communicate with me. But the message was unclear. It was like a riddle that I had to solve if I wanted to get out of this madness. And with each passing second, I was feeling that whatever was happening to me was not just random, and that I was part of a terrifying plan. I knew that whatever was happening to me was connected to the doppelganger, to this strange copy of myself. And as I looked at its cold and unblinking eyes, I knew that I was not just facing an antagonist. I was facing a part of myself, a dark reflection that was trying to consume me. The doppelganger was not a monster. It was me. And in that realization, I felt the weight of the terrifying reality that I was trapped into. This was not going to be an easy adventure, and it was more than likely that I was not going to survive this. The doppelganger and I walked in silence, side by side, through the distorted forest. It never spoke. It never looked away. It was like a mirror that had come to life, and I was now trapped in its reflection. I felt the weight of its gaze, a constant reminder of the impossible situation that I was now in. I tried to focus on the path, on the trees, on anything that could give me a hint of how to escape from this nightmare, but I couldn't. It was as if I was living in a dream, a horrible, twisted dream that I couldn't wake up from. I started to feel a strange connection with the doppelganger, a sense that we were linked in some way. I had always been a loner, a person who preferred solitude over company, but now I was forced to accept this stranger into my life. It was a twisted version of a partnership, a grotesque reflection of human connection, and it was terrifying. I was trapped with a copy of myself that was also my tormentor. As we continued to walk, the forest began to change again. The trees grew taller, the shadows became longer, and the path grew more uneven. It was as if the world was mocking us, creating new obstacles that were designed to test our limits. I knew that I had to do something, that I couldn't just accept my fate. But every attempt to escape was useless. Every attempt to communicate was futile. I was trapped, and I was feeling hopeless. Then I noticed that the doppelganger started to walk in a different direction. I followed it, curious to see where it was going, and then I realized it was not a random path. It was a familiar one. The path was now less distorted, It started to look more like the path that I had taken at the beginning of my hike, and as we continued to walk, I saw it, the Ramsey Cascades, in all of its splendor, but different. They were not the Ramsey Cascades that I had seen in the pictures. They were more intense, more majestic, and more menacing. The waterfall cascaded down the cliff with a deafening roar, the mist rising around it like a shroud. The rocks were jagged and sharp, and the water was an eerie shade of green, a terrifying contrast to the peaceful image I had in my mind. It was a place of beauty, yes, but it was also a place of dread, a place where the veil between realities seemed to be thinner. And I knew that, somehow, this was the place that I was meant to be. But I had no idea why. As I stood there, at the edge of the cliff, staring at the waterfall, I felt a strange pull, a sense that I was being drawn towards it. I felt that I was meant to jump, that it was the only way to break free. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also strangely tempting. It was as if the waterfall was calling me, beckoning me to embrace the unknown. And as I looked at the doppelganger, standing beside me with its cold eyes and sinister smile, I knew that I was facing a moral choice, a dilemma that could determine the fate of my soul. Do I jump and give in to the madness, or do I stay and fight for my survival? The doppelganger started to move towards the waterfall, its steps slow and deliberate. It stopped at the very edge, its body silhouetted against the mist, and it looked at me, as if waiting for me to follow. It was a challenge, an invitation, and I had to make a decision. I had to choose between the darkness and the light, between hope and despair, between life and death. And as I looked into its cold eyes, I realized that I had been wrong, that this was not about a choice. I had been made to believe that there were options, when the only option was to jump into the abyss. It was then that I noticed another detail, a small anomaly that had eluded me until that moment. The doppelganger's reflection in the water was not a mirror image. It was slightly distorted, slightly different, as if it was a different being entirely. And as I looked at it, I had a horrific realization. This being was not me. It was a parasite, a creature that had taken my form, that was using me as a vessel. And the waterfall, with its menacing beauty, was a trap designed to consume me. I knew that I had to act, that I had to fight, that I could not give in to the madness. I had to find a way to break free from this twisted reality. I had to find a way to defeat the doppelganger, and I had to find a way to survive. The doppelganger, now a clearly defined antagonist, was not just a copy of me. It was my enemy, and my survival depended on how I was going to fight against this impossible odds. I had been tricked, manipulated, but now it was time for me to claim my own destiny and to stop the forces that were trying to break me. The realization that the doppelganger was not a reflection, but a parasite, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. It was no longer just about escaping. It was about survival, about fighting against something that was trying to take my place in the world. I backed away from the edge of the cliff, my gaze fixed on the doppelganger, trying to understand its motives, to find a weakness that I could exploit. But it only stared back, its eyes like cold, empty voids, a chilling reminder that I was no longer in control of my destiny. As I stared at the doppelganger, a memory surfaced, unbidden and vivid, like a scene from a forgotten movie reel. I remembered my grandmother, a woman of wisdom and folklore, telling me stories about the thin places in the world, places where the veil between realities was thinner, places where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural blurred. She had warned me about those places. She had urged me to stay away from them, and she had told me about entities that could mimic human forms, that could lure unsuspecting victims into their traps. Her words echoed in my mind now, a haunting reminder of the path that I had chosen. I had been so consumed by my desire to escape the city, to find peace in the wilderness, that I had ignored the warnings. I had dismissed the legends as nothing more than old wives' tales. And I had paid the price for my arrogance. The forest, which I had seen as a place of solace, was now revealed to be a trap, a portal to a different dimension, and I had walked into it blindly. Foolishly, I glanced around, trying to understand the rules of this twisted reality, trying to find a way to break free from its grasp. The trees seemed to be swaying in a silent rhythm. The shadows seemed to dance in a hypnotic pattern, and the waterfall seemed to be emitting a strange, eerie hum, a constant reminder that I was trapped in a place where the laws of nature did not apply. I realized that I was not just facing an enemy. I was facing a force that was ancient, powerful, and beyond human comprehension. And I was a pawn in its game. I looked at my watch. Time seemed to have lost its meaning in this place, but I knew that I had to act quickly. The doppelganger was still standing at the edge of the cliff, its gaze never leaving me, as if it was waiting for me to make a move, to reveal my intentions. The sense of dread that had taken over me was a physical weight in my chest. The forest was waiting for me, and I knew that I had to do something. I also remembered the stories of other hiking groups disappearing in the park, and now I understood what had happened to them. They had encountered their doppelgangers. They had been lured into the thin places, and they had vanished, leaving no trace behind. And I realized that I was now on the same path, destined to become another forgotten soul in this haunted forest. And that fear drove me. The encounter with the doppelganger was not a coincidence. It was a planned event, a part of an intricate system that was designed to lure unsuspecting victims into its traps. It was not just a monster that was trying to kill me. It was also a part of this system, an instrument that was meant to drag me into its web. And as I processed that, I also had the feeling that maybe I had been chosen, that maybe the forest had been watching me before I even arrived. It was a horrifying thought, yes, but it was something that made sense. I had been the perfect target for the monster, a heartbroken and lonely soul, ready to fall for any promise of something new. As I looked at the waterfall, I noticed that the water was not just green. It was also pulsating, as if it was alive, as if it was the heart of this twisted reality. And as I stared at it, I started to see a pattern, a series of interconnected lines that seemed to follow a specific geometry. It was like the patterns of the trail, but this time, they were also part of the waterfall. It was not just water anymore, it was something else. And with each new detail that I uncovered, I felt I was one step closer to the truth. The doppelganger started to move again, walking towards the waterfall, its steps slow and deliberate, its gaze never leaving mine. It was beckoning me, luring me into the abyss, and I knew that I had to act, that I had to find a way to break free from its hypnotic hold. And as I was standing there, alone, facing the embodiment of my greatest fear, I also realized that the only way to win was to break the rules of this twisted game. I had been a pawn, but now I was going to change the game. And I was going to do it in my own terms. The doppelganger reached the edge of the waterfall, its silhouette a dark, ominous figure against the backdrop of the swirling mist. The roar of the water was deafening now, and the air was thick with an unnatural energy. I could feel the pull of the waterfall, a hypnotic force that was drawing me closer, tempting me to surrender to the madness. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the trees swaying in a silent rhythm, the shadows dancing in anticipation of what was to come. I was at a crossroads, and I knew that my next move would determine my fate. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart, and I realized that I couldn't give in to the monster, that I couldn't become another victim of this haunted forest. My grandmother's warnings echoed in my mind, a reminder that there were things in this world that were not meant to be disturbed, that there were places where the laws of nature did not apply, and that I was now facing the consequences of my arrogance. But I also remembered her tales of courage, of the human spirit's ability to overcome the impossible. And I knew that I had to find that strength, that I had to fight. As I looked at the doppelganger, I focused my attention on the patterns that I had seen before, the lines in the water that seemed to connect the waterfall to the forest, and I realized that they were not just patterns. They were also a map, a road map to the truth. The waterfall was not just a physical entity. It was a portal, a gateway to another dimension, and the patterns were the conduits that allowed the entities from the other side to cross over into our world. And the doppelganger, I realized, was not just a parasite. It was also a guide, a key to unlock the door to that other dimension. It was then that I noticed that the doppelganger started to change. Its form started to flicker, its edges seemed to blur, and it started to make strange noises, like a distorted echo of my own voice. It was as if it was losing its grip on this reality, as if its connection to this world was fading away. And as I stared at it, I realized that the doppelganger was not in control. It was also trapped in this twisted dimension, and whatever had created it was now drawing it back. And that meant that if I could somehow disrupt the connection, I might be able to free myself, to break free from this nightmare. The doppelganger started to tremble, its body shaking uncontrollably, its eyes wide with a mix of fear and despair. It reached out its hand towards me, not with a sinister smile, but with a look of desperation, as if it was begging me to help it. It was a sudden and unexpected shift, a glimpse into the being beneath the mask, and in that moment, I had a horrific realization. The doppelganger was not my enemy. It was also a victim, and the entity that had created it was now trying to pull it back to its own dimension, dragging me along with it. The patterns in the water started to glow with an eerie, otherworldly light, and the waterfall seemed to grow larger, more menacing, as if it was about to swallow us whole. I knew that the time to act was now. I had to do something that was beyond my understanding, something that would break the rules of this twisted reality. And I also knew that if I didn't act now, I was going to lose everything. I remembered my grandmother's stories of courage. And in that moment, I had a clear thought. I was not going to surrender. I stepped forward, and instead of moving towards the waterfall, I moved towards the doppelganger, my hand outstretched. And as our hands touched again, the world around us started to twist and distort. I was not just trying to break the connection. I was trying to take control of it, to rewrite the rules of this twisted game, and to face the unknown with courage, with the understanding that whatever I was doing was probably going to be my final action in this world. As our hands connected once more, a jolt of raw, chaotic energy surged through my body, a feeling that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The world around me twisted, buckled, and then completely shattered, as if the veil between realities had been ripped apart. The waterfall seemed to grow larger, its roar intensifying to a deafening crescendo, and the patterns in the water glowed with an otherworldly light, a reflection of the raw power that was now flowing through my veins. I could feel the pull, the force that was drawing me towards the other dimension, but this time I was not being dragged. I was in control. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible, trying to understand the rules of this twisted reality. The doppelganger, its form flickering violently, was now a conduit, a vessel through which the energy was flowing, and I was the one controlling it. I could feel its fear, its confusion, its desperation. And I knew that, somehow, I had just changed the game, and I was ready to face whatever would happen. I took a step towards the waterfall, and the doppelganger stepped with me, its movements mimicking mine, its body trembling with the same chaotic energy. The patterns in the water seemed to respond to my movements, the lines shifting and swirling, as if they were a map that I was now in charge of deciphering. I felt a sense of power, a surge of adrenaline that was both terrifying and liberating. I was not just a victim anymore. I was also an agent, a force that could bend reality to its will. I reached the edge of the waterfall, and the mist swirled around me, obscuring my vision, blurring the lines between the real and the unreal. I looked at the doppelganger, and I could see that it was trying to resist, that it was fighting against the force that was now flowing through it, but it was useless. It was trapped, just as I had been, and it was now being dragged towards the other dimension, its form flickering more intensely with every step that we took. I could also feel the entity on the other side, trying to push back, trying to reclaim its pawn. The pull became stronger. The fight was not over. I realized that the waterfall was not just a portal. It was also a battlefield, a place where the forces of reality and the other dimension were clashing, and I was now at the center of that battle. And I had to make a decision, a choice that would determine the fate of my soul, and the fate of whatever was trapped in that twisted dimension, with me. But I also knew that time was running out, and if I didn't act quickly, the entity would take us both. The doppelganger was starting to scream, its voice a distorted echo of my own, its body trembling as the energy flowed through it. I could feel its pain, its fear, its desperation. And I realized that even though it was a creature from another dimension, it was also a victim, trapped in a cycle of terror that I was now trying to break. And as I looked at the waterfall, I knew that I had to do something, that I could not let the entity drag us both into the abyss. I had to fight. I had to survive, not just for myself, but also for the monster that was also a victim, right beside me. I closed my eyes, focusing on the patterns that I had seen in the water, the map to the other dimension. And I felt a strange calm wash over me, a sense of peace amidst the chaos. I took a deep breath, and I used the energy that was now flowing through my body, not to resist the pull of the waterfall, but to embrace it, to use it as a force that would propel me towards the other side. The world around me blurred again, and I felt myself being pulled into the vortex, my body trembling as I plunged into the unknown. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind was racing, and my body was screaming for me to stop. But I pushed forward, my eyes closed, my will set on surviving. I was now a pawn, a key, and a soldier, fighting a battle that was beyond my comprehension, and willing to pay any price to survive it. And then everything went silent. The roar of the waterfall faded away. The energy stopped flowing, and the world around me became calm and still. I opened my eyes, and I realized that I was no longer in the forest. I was now in another dimension, and everything had changed. The fight was not over. It was just starting. The silence that followed the chaos was both unnerving and profound, a stillness that seemed to penetrate every fiber of my being. I opened my eyes, and I was no longer in the familiar forest. I was now in a world that defied all logic and reason. The landscape was alien, with twisted trees, glowing rocks, and a sky that seemed to be a swirling vortex of light and color. It was a dimension where the rules of nature did not apply, a place where reality itself was a malleable entity. And I was trapped there, with my own reflection as a companion. The doppelganger was still with me, its form flickering, its body trembling, but its eyes were no longer empty voids. They were now filled with a strange mix of fear and understanding. We were no longer just enemies. We were also partners in this twisted adventure, bound together by a connection that had changed the course of our destinies. The energy that I had felt before was still there, flowing through my veins, a constant reminder of the power that I was now wielding. And as I looked around this strange new world, I realized that my journey was far from over. I started to move forward, my steps slow and deliberate, trying to navigate this alien landscape. The ground beneath my feet was soft and yielding, like a layer of moss, and the air was heavy with a strange, sweet scent, an odor that seemed to be both alluring and menacing. The trees were twisted and gnarled, like the limbs of some ancient beast, and the rocks glowed with an internal light, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around me like living things. It was a world that was both beautiful and terrifying, a place where anything could happen, a place where the impossible was now reality. As I walked, I started to feel a strange sense of connection to this world, as if it was communicating with me, revealing its secrets, its mysteries, its purpose. I realized that this was not just a random dimension. It was also a place with its own rules, its own laws, its own challenges, and I had to understand them if I wanted to survive. I felt like an explorer venturing into an unknown land, ready to face whatever the world would throw at me. But this time, I was not just seeking beauty. I was also seeking understanding, seeking a way out of this madness. I also realized that the connection between me and the doppelganger was more than just a physical link. It was also a link between our consciousnesses, a sharing of thoughts and feelings, a merging of souls. I could feel its fear, its confusion, its desperation. But I also felt its strength, its resilience, its willingness to fight. And I understood that we were both trapped, that we were both victims of something that was beyond our comprehension. But we were also the only ones who could break free. We were now allies. I had to make a choice. I could either give into the madness, embrace the alien world, and lose myself in its twisted beauty, or I could fight against the odds, find a way to escape, and try to return to my own reality. It was a dilemma that was both terrifying and liberating, a challenge that would test my very soul. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt that I was not just fighting for survival. I was also fighting for myself. My will to live was growing, and I was ready to face whatever was to come. I knew that the only way to escape this twisted dimension was to understand its rules, to decipher the codes that governed its reality. And I realized that the patterns in the water were not just a map. They were also a key, a way to unlock the doors that were trapping us. I remembered my grandmother's teachings, her stories of courage, her wisdom about the human spirit. She had always taught me to never give up, to never surrender to fear, and to never stop believing in myself. And now I was putting her teachings to the test. It was time for me to show what I had learned. I started to move forward with a newfound purpose, my body filled with a mix of fear and determination. My mind was still racing, my heart was still pounding in my chest, but I knew that I had to keep going, that I had to keep fighting, that I had to keep believing. I had been a pawn, a victim, but now I was the one in control, and I was ready to face the darkness, to embrace the unknown, and to claim my own destiny. And the world was now my stage. The alien landscape stretched before me, a surreal canvas of twisted trees, glowing rocks, and a sky that seemed to writhe like a living being. The doppelganger walked beside me, its form now more stable, its eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination, a reflection of my own emotions. We were no longer just two separate beings. We were now a single entity, linked together by a connection that had changed the course of our destinies. And we were moving forward, step by step, into the heart of the unknown. As we walked, the landscape started to change again. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining to form a canopy above us, and the rocks grew more jagged, creating a labyrinth of paths and tunnels. The air grew heavier, thick with a strange, sweet scent, and the ground beneath our feet started to tremble, as if the very dimension itself was reacting to our presence. I could feel a growing sense of unease, a sense that we were being watched, that we were being tested, that we were being drawn into a trap, I focused my attention on the patterns that I had seen in the water, trying to decipher their meaning, trying to understand the rules of this twisted reality. I realized that they were not just a map. They were also a code, a way to unlock the secrets of this dimension, a way to break free from its grasp. The patterns were all around me, on the trees, on the rocks, on the very fabric of this world, and as I stared at them, they started to reveal their meaning, their purpose, their true nature. The doppelganger, sensing my focus, looked at me with a strange sense of understanding, a silent communication that transcended words. I knew that it was also trying to make sense of this twisted world, that it was also searching for a way to escape its grasp. And I realized that we were not just two beings trapped in the same nightmare. We were also two explorers trying to find our way back home. And that made our alliance stronger, more solid than ever. As we moved forward, I started to hear a strange sound, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones. The hum grew louder, more intense, with each step that we took, and I knew that we were getting closer to the heart of this dimension, to the place where the veil between realities was thinnest. The ground started to shake more violently, and the landscape around us grew more distorted, as if the very fabric of reality was starting to unravel. The time for waiting was over. The doppelganger stopped, its body trembling, its eyes fixed on a point in the distance. I followed its gaze, and I saw it, a massive structure that seemed to be made of living light, a pulsating vortex that was the source of all the energy in this dimension. The structure was like a living being, its form constantly shifting, its light growing brighter with each passing moment. It was a terrifying sight, yes, but it was also strangely beautiful, a glimpse into a reality that was far beyond human comprehension. And I knew that this was our destination, that this was where our journey would reach its climax. As we got closer, the doppelganger started to speak, its voice a distorted echo of my own, its words a mixture of fear and desperation. "It's here," it whispered, its voice trembling. "It's been waiting for us. We have to be ready." And that was when I realized that the doppelganger was not just a mirror of myself. It was also a reminder of something that I had long forgotten. The memories of my grandmother and the stories of the park started to fill my mind again, and then it happened. As we stood before the structure of living light, the ground split open, and a massive chasm opened right in front of us. A dark, shadowy figure emerged from the depths, its form shifting and changing, its presence exuding an aura of ancient power. It was then that I realized that the doppelganger was not my enemy, that the waterfall was not a trap, and that the forest was not a prison. The true enemy, the true source of all this madness, was not a place. It was a being that I had underestimated, and it had been waiting for us all along. The real antagonist of this story was not an entity, it was a concept. The personification of fear itself. The shadowy figure that emerged from the chasm was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It was formless, and yet it had a distinct shape, like a living embodiment of fear itself. Its presence exuded a raw power that seemed to shake the very foundations of this dimension, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I was facing the source of all the madness, the true enemy that had been pulling the strings all along. The doppelganger stood beside me, its body trembling, its eyes wide with a mixture of fear and acceptance, and I knew that we had to face this horror together, or we would be consumed by its darkness. The shadowy figure started to move, its form shifting and changing like a living kaleidoscope, and its voice echoed in the silent dimension, a distorted whisper that seemed to penetrate my very soul. "You cannot escape me," it hissed, its words like icy shards piercing through my thoughts. "I am the fear that dwells in your heart, the doubt that plagues your mind. You are my puppet, and I will drag you into the abyss. I felt a surge of dread, a primal fear that was threatening to overwhelm me. But I also felt a strange sense of calm, a sense of understanding that had come from the memories of my grandmother and the warnings of the forest. I realized that I had been so focused on the physical aspects of this journey, on the doppelganger, on the waterfall, on the twisted landscape, that I had ignored the true nature of the enemy. It was not a monster from another dimension. It was a reflection of my own fear, my own doubts, my own insecurities. And it was using the twisted reality to manifest itself in a physical form. My enemy was not in the outside world. It was inside. Me, the doppelganger, looked at me, its eyes filled with a strange mix of fear and courage, and it reached out its hand, our fingers touching again, as if we were trying to find strength in our connection, in our shared fate. And as our hands touched, I felt that the energy that was flowing through me was no longer just a source of power. It was also a conduit for my will, for my resilience, for my very essence. I had been the pawn, yes, but I had also become the one that held the power. The fear was still there, yes, but I had now learned how to control it. I had become the master of my own fears. I took a deep breath, and I focused my energy, not to resist the shadowy figure, but to embrace it, to confront it with the strength that I had gained, with the courage that I had discovered in the depths of this twisted reality. And as I stood there, facing the personification of fear, I realized that I was not alone, that the doppelganger was by my side, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, there was always a spark of hope, a chance for redemption. I closed my eyes and I focused my attention on the patterns that I had seen before, the codes to this twisted dimension, and I realized that they were also the codes to my own soul, the keys to unlock my own potential. And I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward towards the shadowy figure, and I released the energy that was flowing through me, not as a weapon, but as an act of acceptance, an act of love, an act of forgiveness. The doppelganger did the same, following my actions and mirroring my every step. The force that had once threatened to consume us had now become our strength. The shadowy figure recoiled, its form flickering violently, its voice a distorted scream of pain. "You cannot defeat me," it cried, its words a mix of rage and terror. "I am the fear that dwells in your heart, the doubt that plagues your mind. You are my creation." And it was then, in that moment, that I had the final revelation. It was not my creation. It was a reflection of my fears. My enemy had always been my self-data as the shadowy figure tried to grasp us, to claim us, to consume us. I realized that I had finally understood the rules of this twisted game. And I also realized that I was now free. It was time for me to choose my own destiny. The world around us shattered. The shadowy figure vanished into nothingness, and the dimension itself started to crumble. And as the world around me faded away, I knew that this nightmare was finally over. I had won the fight against my own fears. I was now back at the forest, at the beginning of the trail, the familiar sounds of nature surrounding me. I was alone. The doppelganger was gone, and I realized that I had survived. Yes, but I had also changed. I had faced my fears. I had conquered my demons, and I had come out of this nightmare a stronger, wiser, more resilient version of myself. But I was also left with the knowledge that the darkness was always there, hidden just beneath the surface of the world, and I knew that I would never truly be free of it. I had survived, yes, but sometimes I still wonder if I have truly escaped that place, and if I am not still there, trapped in the twisted mirror of my own mind. The sun was rising over the great Smoky Mountains, casting a soft golden light on the familiar landscape. I was back at the beginning of the trail, my body exhausted, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed, but my spirit stronger, more resilient than ever before. The world around me seemed normal, peaceful, a stark contrast to the twisted dimension that I had just escaped. But I knew that nothing would ever be the same, that I had been changed by my experience, that I had seen the face of fear itself, and that I would never forget it. The doppelganger was gone, its purpose fulfilled, its existence no longer necessary. But I knew that it was not just a monster from another dimension. It was also a part of me, a reflection of my own fears, my own doubts, my own insecurities. And in defeating it, I had also defeated a part of myself, a dark reflection that had been holding me back. I knew that I had won the battle, but I also knew that the war was far from over, that the darkness was always there, waiting in the shadows, and that I would have to face it again, in different ways, in different forms. The long-term consequences of my actions were difficult to predict. Had I truly broken free from the cycle of fear, or was I just delaying the inevitable? Would the other hiking groups that disappeared before me ever return? Would that entity rise again? The questions lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the terrifying reality that I had faced, and I knew that I had to live with them, that I had to learn to navigate my life with this new burden. I returned to my photography, to my passion for capturing beauty and truth in the world around me. But my vision had changed. I was now seeing the world through a new lens, a lens that was aware of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, of the forces that were beyond human comprehension. The world would never feel safe again, and my peace would be forever tainted. With the knowledge of the true nature of the universe, I decided to share my story, to warn others about the dangers that lurked in the shadows, about the thin places that were hidden in the most unexpected of locations, and to warn people to never, ever go to Ramsey Cascades after sunset. Perhaps that could save a life or two, I thought, and maybe that would be the only thing that could bring a little bit of peace to my haunted soul. The wilderness would not be a place of peace and calm anymore, but a reminder of the horrors that I had witnessed, of the fear that I had faced, and of the transformation that I had embraced. I would never forget what I had learned in that twisted dimension, that fear was not just an emotion, but an entity, a force that could consume you if you let it. But I had also learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to face it head on, to embrace the unknown, and to keep moving forward despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm you. And I was forever changed by that knowledge. Years have passed since my encounter at Ramsey Cascades. I still visit the park, drawn to its beauty, to its mystery, but I never go back to that trail. The memory of the doppelganger, of the twisted dimension, of the shadowy figure, still haunts me, a constant reminder of the battle that I fought, and of the fear that I overcame, but that still lingers in the corners of my mind. I know that the darkness is always there, lurking beneath the surface of the world, and that it will always be a part of me. This is my story, a glimpse into the darkness that exists beyond our understanding, and how that darkness lives inside of us. Have you ever faced your own demons? Have you ever encountered something that you couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments below. And if you were captivated by this journey, click on the next video, which will show you another glimpse of the strange and the bizarre, and see what other horrors are hidden beneath the veil of reality.